Hello, I'm Citrus, and you're looking at the super deformed Gundam Cross Silhouette Zaku II. This kit came out in July of 2018, and it retails for 800 yen. Did you look at it? Looks pretty nice. This has some new updated proportions, and the big gimmick is that you can replace the short, tiny internal skeleton with a bigger one that's sold separately, and it gives it knee joints, elbow joints, and just a little bit more articulation in general. The separate skeleton is available for 600 yen, so a little bit pricey as a whole package. Altogether, we have 4 plates of plastic. You have these 2 bags here, which came out of the Zaku, and this one that came out of the frame. The frame is also available in a lighter gray, almost white color that's meant to go with the RX-78, and I guess the gray is for basically everything else. So let's start with the Zaku parts. Okay, so here is the Zaku's internal frame, polycapless construction this time, although you can see there is a little piece there that looks like what normally would be a ball joint polycap that we typically see on SD kits. There's not too much detail going on, everything is just ball jointed, but should still be able to move around enough. Next to the cross silhouette frame, you can see just how much more plastic you get. These bits here are for the upper arms and thighs. They are supposed to be the same color as the body, but of course they are gray, so you have to paint it up if you want all the colors to be correct. And it also includes the GM head, which you can see is cast so that it can be removed from the runner. I originally thought they did this so that when they include this in bundled sets, you wouldn't get the GM head, but in the one bundled set that we've seen, which is the RX-78 with silhouette frame, the GM head is still included, so not really sure why Bandai chose to do it this way. And this seed tree from the Zaku is most of its accessories. You can see not too much hollowness is going on. There's a little bit in the feet, and if we turn it around, we can see some in the back of the missile pods, but it's pretty good overall. And for the body parts, we have a dark green and a lighter green. All the colors are more or less correct. You can see a clear pink part here for the mono eye, which looks very good. And on this side, we have a clear yellow part for the Heat Hawk, which is very impressive considering that not even the high-grade Gundam Origin Zakus have colored effect parts for their Heat Hawks. The rest of the molding looks really fine as well. Definitely could use a panel lining to really make it pop. Now you can see these are the short gates that are meant for you to be able to remove with your fingers, but of course we're going to do this with tools because we don't want achy hands. For panel lining this time, we'll use Real Touch Green number 1, which is a color I don't get to use very often. And we're going to pick out some details with this Craft Smart silver leafing pen, which is really vibrant, very shiny. And we're going to pick out the tick marks with Char Pink, because this little guy is aspirational. If you're interested in painting your cross silhouette frame, the Zaku Light Green is a pretty close match. You can see from the cap here compared to a piece of the plastic. Very similar color, although this is slightly more yellow as I see it on camera. And if you put it on the runner, this color here is what it will look like. This is after 2 coats, and if you compare it to the plastic again, it is not quite the same, but you're going to be painting very small surfaces, so if you didn't want to mix up anything, the Gundam markers should suffice. Once again, doing this through the camera here, so my hands aren't the steadiest. I'll have to clean that up properly later. Yeah, it looks pretty good. And here we just need to do tiny drops on either side and clean it up later. These metallic leafing pens, they smell pretty bad and they don't look good over big surfaces, but for little tiny things like this, just need a single drop. Looks pretty good. And to build this, we start with the weapons first. I spent much more time detailing this than I expected to, and it's because there's actually quite a lot to pick out with paint, and it just looks really good. Now, I painted the blade of the Heat Hawk silver, and it's made it a little bit too thick for the effect part. Still kind of fits on there, but I probably won't be taking it off. A couple months ago, I was in San Francisco visiting family, and I stopped by a local hobby store called Tatsu Hobby, where I picked this up. Wasn't really planning on it in the beginning, but I didn't have much luggage space, and they had this in stock, so I thought, why not? I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, and I have to say I'm quite pleasantly surprised. And Tatsu Hobby is a pretty great store. They have a pretty big selection of stuff, and they are a little bit hard to find because they're at the end of this little industrial park, but I'll put their address in the bottom and their website so you can see where they are. They're right next door to this place that sells Funko Pops. I think it used to be some other business, but when you do find their store, there'll be like a Gundam poster in the door, so you'll know where you are when you see it. I didn't do too much painting to any of the weapons because I know I'll be handling these a lot, putting them on and taking them off of the kit, so didn't want anything to really rub off or anything like that. Everything looks really good. Solid proportions for these tiny little weapons, which are still very recognizable despite the small size. And for the actual Zaku, we'll adjust the kit as it is first, and then see what it's like once we put the cross silhouette frame in. As you can probably tell by the large pile of parts in the background, this is pretty involved for a kit that's only 800 yen. I definitely wasn't expecting something this serious, especially at this price point, considering that the Haropla kits are only about 500 or so, which don't have a lot of parts. And the SDEX standard, which I think this line is supposed to replace, were 600 yen per kit, but they are just so much less involved, and the color separation on those were pretty awful. I couldn't understand the motivation behind those kits because they didn't look substantially different from the BB Senshi kits, but there was a substantial drop in the build quality of those kits, and I just couldn't understand why Bandai decided to go that way. I mean, some of them did have more articulation or whatever, but it was definitely not enough to compensate for how much worse the kits looked right out of the box. Here's that little polycap piece. Now to change the frame, we do have to take the head off, and I hope that this grips better than the head will grip to the polycap so that we won't have any parts that are stuck in here or anything like that. Of course, there are some cross silhouette kits that aren't very good either. I'm looking specifically at like the Zeta and the Crossbone, which again, they're not terrible or anything, but they're just not as pretty as some of the other ones. Those kits definitely rely more on stickers for their color, so if you paint it up, it's not going to be terrible, but it's just more work than you'd have to do on one of these. Then we pop the chest piece on. That's pretty cool. So you can have the chest popped up and it'll have some movement, or you can push it all the way down and it just rotates, but there's no gap. Then we can stick our completed leg in here along with the other one. Looking good so far. Yeah, these kits are definitely way more involved than I expected them to be. I built the older SD Zaku, I think it's like G generation or something like that. Now I don't have it anymore, but I definitely do not recall that kit being nearly this complex. That said, everything is still really easy to put together. Oh boy, need to get that in there. There we go. It's not like this is really going to be any more complicated than a high grade, but there's just so much more movement and detail in these. It's amazing. Okay, and this is our little spike shoulder. I hope the little painted bits I put on the shoulder aren't too much, because there are a lot of them. Doesn't look too bad. Yeah, so you can see I have a shoulder up here and a wrist up here. Looks pretty good. I like the natural angle that it sits at. Pop this into the shoulder. So again, we can pull it out more for more range, or put it in all the way so that it's flush. Here's the other one. Very nice. So I'd imagine if there was going to be a Char Zaku, there would probably be like a fin sticking out of this piece or something, because this goes straight into the top of the head. And it fills in that gap right there. I'm going to put this down. Put the eye together. Stick it on this. So there's some of that silver marker I was talking about before. Then put in the clear pink lens, which looks amazing. Really like how that looks compared to the stickers that we used to get on SD kits. And then we take the tubes, push these through. Pop this on. Okay, there we go. That's our little Zaku head with moving mono eye. Oh, that looks really nice. I really like that. And then we stick this on top of the body. Oh wow, there's actually a good range of movement in there because of the neck joint. Very nice. And you can't really move the eye too much without just sticking your finger really in there. Pretty easy to unsettle the legs from their sockets, but there's good range of motion there. Feet can rock side to side a little bit. Wow, I like just how this is as it is now so much. I don't even want to really put in the other frame, but you know, gotta try it out. Actually, before that, we can put all the accessories on just to see what they look like. The missile pods on the legs. Can put the bazooka on the back. Let's put the machine gun in one hand. And the heat hawk in the other. Alright, it's pretty fully loaded here. Okay, now to put together the silhouette frame. Pretty straightforward. Most of this is actually very similar. Just gonna put the whole arm together now. For the neck, there are two options. You have this size, which is the standard Cross Silhouette size, or you have this one, which is tinier, which fits more of the older SD kits. I guess the intention is that you can put this frame inside of other kits as well, but I don't know how you'd be able to do that without having to literally hack up a ton of stuff. It's probably more intended for more skilled builders than towards novice builders. There's the foot. The other leg. So here's a little skeleton. It's oddly proportioned, it may seem. The arms might be too short, but you have to remember that you're supposed to put hands on these, which then sort of bring them in line. Alright, so most of this should be pretty easy to swap over, so let's give that a try. Before we start taking everything off, you can see that with this new frame, the kit would gain a little bit of height, and I hope the proportions will still look the same because the arms and legs will get longer, but the torso is going to stay the same size. And as we feared, the ball joint stayed inside of the head instead of staying on the peg. This chest part is really pinched by these cables and it really doesn't want to come off. I'm starting to think that maybe the kits weren't designed for you to build the kit in one form and then be able to easily take it apart and rebuild it in another form. You can sort of see how some of the pieces have very large pegs on them. For instance, here on the legs, very thick pegs so that they're not likely to snap when you're pulling them apart. But taking the whole thing and trying to break it down is still somewhat difficult. Like, I don't know how to separate the foot piece out of the foot at all. Okay, so I managed to finally pry this piece off of the foot with a flathead screwdriver, and you have to change this for the frame to look right, because if you take a look at the difference here, the standard foot piece is much shorter than the frame's foot. Alright, so after a good 20 minutes of struggling, here is the original frame that we extracted. And remember, of course, the ball joint is stuck in the head, so we're going to have to take the one off of this and put it back over here. You can see the foot piece sticks out a lot more here for extra articulation. Much more lean to the left, which is pretty cool. I left the thighs unpainted here just to see what it would look like, and I think the skirts will cover it up enough that I probably won't be bothered by the exposed gray. And there's the leg. So from the front, it definitely looks a bit gappier, but of course that's to allow the foot to move around more. And we have a 90-degree bend, which is pretty solid. Body should be pretty straightforward. So I think what we're supposed to do is probably put this side on first like that. Then stick this in and put this piece in through the back. Like so. And then our little backpack holds everything in place. Yeah, that was much easier. Pretty gappy up here as well, but of course this is to facilitate the shoulders, which are supposed to be able to move in and out. So you stick the leg on, and there are the legs. Alright, so there's definitely more room for movement, but I think the frame by itself just looks a little bit too skinny. They're also not round, which doesn't match with the rounded calves down here. The skirt does sort of cover it up from the front, but doesn't look the best. Now for the arms. This is definitely much easier than doing the legs, that's for sure. Yeah, the arms I think look much better because the exposed bit is a lot shorter. If we stick the head on. And pull the shoulders out a little bit, just to give the head a little bit more room. And it looks okay. It's not terrible, but I'm not the biggest fan of it. The legs look like they're a little bit too long. They just sort of stick out and they're a bit dangly. And the knee joint is really nice, but there's nothing really up here, so it looks kind of like it's just sticking off of the body. A little bit odd. So it seems like the recommended thing to do is really just pick one style and stick with it rather than being able to switch on and off all of the different parts, which is a little bit of a shame because I was expecting more of that plug and play ability. Of course, all of the connections in the two frames, so the big one and the tiny one, are the same. So you could conceivably mix and match. So let's try that. Okay, so what I've done here is taken the lower half of the original frame and put it under the top half of the Cross Silhouette frame. It's a little bit odd, but I kind of like how this looks. The top half of it looks a little bit more burly, and because of all the extra joints up here, the top half of the body can be more expressive because you can have the arms move and the elbows bend, which looks really great, but the legs don't look too long. So this is a pretty good compromise for me, and it actually kind of reminds me of the older ST aesthetic, because you'd have feet that would stick out of the waist, and you'd have the top half with arms, so the arms always looked longer than they really should. Now that said, I'm not really sure if the frame is really worth it on its own. The base kits by themselves, definitely worth it. I think they're a fantastic deal, really fun build for just 800 yen. As for the extra frame, the extra 400 yen really depends on whether or not you like the specific look for the mobile suit. For the Gundam type suits that have skinnier legs, where the skinnier thighs aren't going to be a problem, I think that's probably fine, but for something like this with such bulbous calves, it just looks a bit too off. So yeah, it's fantastic, and if I see any other ones coming out in the future that catch my eye, I'll definitely pick them up and review them for you guys. I'm looking forward to seeing a normal unicorn perhaps, because the Phoenix looks really good with all its clear parts, and hopefully we'll also get more from the 1 Year War. I'd love to see a new SD Cross Silhouette Dom or something like that, because I don't think we've gotten an SD Dom for over 10 years now. So that would be nice. See the classics get some love. I think what's really great about this line of kits is that because there's so much engineering put into them, you could conceivably not paint it up at all and it'll still look pretty good. But there is so much detail in these that you could add just a little bit of paint here and there and it'll look just amazing. The simple construction is really great for beginners, but it's also not so underwhelming that veteran builders would have nothing to do with these. So really nice balanced little package here. So that's all for this little review. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.